next I welcome Dr. Amar Patnaik to come up on the stage and address us all today. Dr. Patnaik is a member of parliament in the Rajya Sabha. He represents the Biju Janata Dal and he is also the party's national spokesperson and head of party's IT wing. So with a loud round of applause, Dr. Amar Patnaik.
Thank you so much for inviting me to this conference. We passed the Women Reservation Bill yesterday, I think close to midnight, and so finally it's an act of Parliament. Of course, it is to be assented by the President. It's a constitutional amendment. Now the purpose of my saying this is that one is really groggy about, I reached home I think around about 1 o'clock, but that's the idea. The idea was that that was a historic occasion, and this is long overdue. This was something for which particularly my party, Chief Minister Naveen Patnaik had been spearheading this movement for about 25 years, and it was in many ways unique also from the fact that once implemented, we will have the largest number of women MPs in the Parliament anywhere in the world, even bigger than the developing countries. Because the reservation would bring in 33%, now the maximum is about 25, 26 in other countries. Well, thank you to the organizers for inviting me to this function. I usually write and speak on technology, and being a lawyer and policy maker, so I also write on the cross section of tech policy and implementation. What I thought I'll speak to you today, which many of you would know, is the fact that emerging technologies have come to occupy a kind of a pole position in our lives, not just in the economy, in our lives. And while we celebrate all that, we must celebrate. I'll be talking about a few areas in which we still can do much more. There are significant challenges, significant risks that we should also be aware of. And these were, honestly speaking, these are getting discussed by the committees in which I'm a member. For example, when I was a member of the Joint Parliamentary Committee on Personal Data Protection Bill, we discussed at great length how misuse or abuse of data can cause huge amount of harm to a significantly large population, many of whom may already be facing a lot of disadvantages and a lot of inequities as it is. Currently while in my role as a member of the Finance Committee, Standing Committee on Finance, we did discuss, and we do discuss regularly, on the regulatory gaps, the regulatory vacuum in the digital space, and of course the challenges arising out of cybersecurity. So let me first talk to you a little bit about, being a lawyer in lots of technology firms, those who are fintechs, those who are in the insurance business, and some of them who are lending applications, they do come to me for advice. But one thing I've realized, that the full potential of emerging technology is yet to be unleashed in India so far. The technology is there, but as you know, whether it is AI or it is generative AI, use of blockchain, the potential both in the public sector as well as in the private sector is immense, and we have only covered a small portion of it. Of course, we are galloping. You would have seen that. And I travel to countries all over the world to feel proud. Everyone talking about our digital adoption. In many countries, emerging technologies have been used to develop applications for use by population, use by their citizens, but the adoption rate is very low. In our country, you must, understand this. In our country, despite very low financial literacy, particularly in the rural areas, I'm talking about rural areas where maximum population stay, about 60% stay there, towns is about 40%. And despite access to technology also being low, and knowledge about digital technology also not being very high in rural areas, the adoption rate is close to 88% in rural areas. You would often find you walking into a pan yesterday, in fact, for example, I'll give you the example. Yesterday, the finance minister was telling me that in Bangalore, I think these people who come to sell their ware and other things on the roads, I believe people, they have the QR code over there, and people want to buy. Previously, they used to come out of the car, look at the stuff, maybe make payment by cash, largely by cash or by a credit card. But now from window of the car, they just take the QR code and make the payment. But this is the kind of adoption that has taken. I'm sure that street hawker doesn't know about digital technology, what's the technology behind all this QR code and all that. He doesn't know about digital payments. He doesn't know about UPI, how it is being affected. The only thing that he knows is that that money is coming to his bank account. But he has so much of, here also another thing, he has so much of confidence, trust, that that money is coming to his account. Many, not many years ago, they didn't probably have a bank account. So the first thing, the three things happened, that the Jam Trinity, he has a bank account. He trusts that that money which he is supposed to get through the QR code is getting credited to his bank account. And he also knows that he can go and withdraw that money at any point of time through, again, another probably digital process. Now, this is the beauty of adoption in Indian system. And since there is no hesitancy in using technology, even at that level, so you can imagine that if you develop an application using one of these technologies, blockchain, IoT together, AI, blockchain, IoT together, then the potential for, and so long as it meets his needs or her needs, the chance or the probability of success of that particular application is immense. And again, the beauty of our system so far has been that in the past 7-8 years, not even a decade, we have a number of things. For example, the cost of transaction has come down, and that cost of transaction having come down is being shared at two levels. One, probably the supplier as well as the buyer. So the people who are benefiting from this are the people who are in need of income, and therefore the adoption rate is very high. Imagine adoption of any technology, not necessarily computer technology. It could be a tractor, it could be a solar panel ambulance. The culture of the area is significant or is very important in deciding whether that particular technology will be adopted or not. But what has happened in our country, and very, very, happily, this is happening. It's a happy development that This adoption, adaptation, and diffusion is taking place at a very fast pace, at a pace which government probably never thought would probably happen. And therefore, our regulations are falling behind the technology. This is probably happening all over the world. Regulations can never keep pace with technology. But in a country where people are believing this system, a trust has been built up. If you do not supply these regulations, what would happen is that this trust will break. This trust will start declining, and that would be a huge loss not only to the people who are using this technology, but to the country as a whole. And therefore, there is a need for coming out with appropriate regulation. There are problems with regulation. While there should not be a regulatory vacuum, there should not be under-regulation, and there should not be over-regulation as well. Over-regulation kills innovation. Under-regulation results in loss of trust. So a balance has to be reached in any kind of regulation, particularly in the tech field. And in the tech field, because of the innovations that are taking place, the crux of these innovations, the crux of the adoption, the crux of development of this technology or applications is data. And therefore, and since we are a country of 1.4 billion people, we generate so much of data within the country ourselves. And since the coming of age of Wave 3 peer-to-peer technologies, 3 or 4 things are very important. I will talk about those 4 things. Number 1, and this is against the perspective of regulation. While there are regulatory vacuums, and I told you that once there is a regulatory vacuum, it is likely to lead to loss of trust by the users of the system or by the users of the application in the digital ecosystem. Over-regulation would kill innovation. This innovation arises from smart use of data. And number 3, under-regulation results in a vitiated market, giving some advantage to a few and not giving the advantages to others. So there is a imperfect market happening in the digital space. Now take the example of while I was a member of the Joint Parliamentary Committee on Personal Data Protection, one realizes that the big tech uses this data to create to innovate. Smart use of data, linking different variables, linking different data sets from different sources is at the root of innovation. But it is the same thing that gives them undue competitive advantage sometimes, which might result in loss of competition. And that's why there is a competition commission. So we were grappling with this, issue of how much space we give to regulation and how much of space we give to innovation. In the Personal Data Protection Bill, now it's an act of Parliament. In the last session it was passed. There is no quarrel over the fact that personal data of data principals or individuals will have to be protected, safeguarded by those who are collecting the data, whom we call as the data fiduciaries. That's because personal data has been interpreted by the Supreme Court of India as an essential part of right to privacy, and right to privacy has been read into the right to life, which is a fundamental right of our Constitution, and therefore it is non-negotiable. Even government can't do much about it because it's a law of the land now. The Supreme Court having interpreted it. But if we continue to be extremely cautious and not allow this data which is being collected by different data fiduciaries for development of different applications, then what is the use of this data, this enormous amount of data? And that is where the question comes, whether data is significant on its own. If you collect a huge amount of data, is it very, very significant? Or the use of data is important? So the use of data is important. And the use of data has to be done responsibly, and this is what the law should be, or the regulation should be able to achieve. And therefore the encrypted data or metadata should be available to people uniformly. That's what a market should be doing, a perfect market, competition. Same data available to uniformly to everyone, and then the intellectual property of that particular organization develops a product X, someone develops a product Y, X succeeds in the market, Y doesn't succeed in the market. That's the first part. But if there are behemoths who are already collecting data, and they develop systems, network systems, bundled products, that the data which is collected is available only to them and not to people who want to start, the startups, small MSMEs who are in that sector, then what is the use of a welfare state? What is the use of having such kind of a data or such kind of a digital ecosystem where there is no competition amongst the digital service providers? And that is where the antitrust or the competition laws come in. Again, while interpreting the competition laws, and as you can see that because the big tech have access to so much of data, which is not stored in the country, there are two possibilities that can happen. Of course, one, huge barriers to entry for small, fledgling, young startups. And second, digital colonization can happen. So these two aspects have to be evaluated by any competition body while interpreting any action by huge data fiduciaries, including the government. Government is, by the way, the largest data fiduciary, I would think, because they collect a huge amount of data. And therefore, the competition laws, which, with the recent amendments, are seeking to address this issue. However, the competition laws in our country were made at a time when the competition was largely in the physical space, not in the digital space. And therefore, we in the committee have given a report to the government on the possibility, on the necessity of having a Digital Markets Act on the lines of the European Union. That's under consideration. However, the Minister of Corporate Affairs feels that the existing competition law should be able to take care of it. But these are the two facets. The third facet is bias, and this is very, very relevant to India. I always say, not just even as a public representative, but even when I was a bureaucrat, that a digital delight is not necessarily a citizen's delight. While it can provide happiness to a few, it could probably perpetrate and maybe multiply manifold a section of society which is already deprived. Fortunately, I will dwell on this a little more. Fortunately, as I said, since the digital adoption rate in India is one of the highest, I think it is third after US and China. The problem is the data itself, which is collected from these people, are having an implicit bias in it. These biases come from gender. Very simple. Someone is collecting a data. Instead of the wife replying, the husband replies. The perceptions will be different, but you process the data as if it is the wife's data. So children and women, or females of any ages, they suffer from this societal, cultural inequity, bias. Now, if you collect that data, use AI, and more particularly generative AI on it, you are actually modeling everything around this bias only. So this is something which I keep telling. I keep on addressing fintechs, all kinds of players. I keep on telling this, that one has to, while developing these technologies, and mind you, why do you have to do all this? Because if you lose trust, it's a huge loss to the entire digital ecosystem. Not just one player, to all the players. So I always say that fall back on the already established research principle of data triangulation. You collect data in one means, but you triangulate the data, maybe by other means, to see that the data can be relied upon, is free of bias. You know that our Constitution says at several places that rights are available to people irrespective of caste, creed, religion, so many things it says. But in life, in practice, you see what happens. It so happens that the disadvantaged castes are deprived of a number of benefits even within the existing system. A particular religion, people may be deprived of some, people belong to a particular religion may be deprived of certain benefits. A particular creed may be deprived of certain benefits. Now, if you develop applications based on this, then you know that the final product could give happiness to a smaller section of people, while alienating completely a larger section of people. So what would happen is trust in the system would go down, adoption rate will subsequently go down, people will not believe new innovations. So it is in the interest of new developers that they should be cognizant of this huge challenge that they face while developing applications. So instead of quickly getting into a live mode from a production mode, I would strongly suggest that the regulatory sandbox approach or the innovation sandbox approach should be followed. And this is what I have been pushing RBI and SEBI every time I meet them in the committee, also through my questions in Parliament, that we have to somehow, because of typical Indian cultural bias implicit in any data that is collected, to somehow make this ecosystem of sandboxes a very kind of a growing ecosystem, independently or sitting at a level between live system and a production system, or maybe even at the production system. Unfortunately, while after my persistent interventions, RBI has now got some players that's trying to promote the regulatory sandboxes, the innovation sandboxes, as well as the regulatory sandboxes for fintechs, for insurtechs, for agritechs. SEBI has not been able to do it. There's just one person, I think, who is there. One applicant is just doing an innovation. So this is one area in which you could think of, and I'm one who would probably also promote private innovation sandboxes, not just public sector innovation sandboxes. So this is why you have to do this if you want to take care of the bias element in the data that is collected in our country. The fourth is cybersecurity. In India, by the latest data that was furnished to us by the MeitY and others, we have had, again, we probably haven't given the report finally, but we have discussed at length with all players, big tech, small tech, startups, METI, CERTIN, RBI, SEBI, we have talked to everyone. To say that cybersecurity is another area, another challenge that is going to hit at this trust greatly if not addressed properly. To just give you some figures, we have about 600 crores annually of cyber frauds reported at the banks and at various payment points. Now, if you look at the 12.8 trillion rupees of UPI payments, this is a minuscule percentage, 0.001, one of the best in the world. But if you look at the gross value, it's 600 crores. It's not a small amount because it's a big country. And it has to be addressed. And therefore, we have made recommendations. And the purpose of my telling it to you here is, there are two things that I think tech developers have to take into account while doing this, besides the bias aspect. One, I talked about it, privacy by design. Otherwise, your upfront compliance cost will become high if you want to retrofit something over there. So privacy by design should be the principle. And second thing is the thing that I was talking to you about, that the internal security controls while developing the applications to prevent a cyber fraud from taking place has to be high. It's not just government's role. It has to be also a part of your development process. Because the ultimate, again at the cost of repetition, the ultimate aim is you have to retain that trust which the common citizen of India has reposed on you or on our digital ecosystem, which includes the government, which includes you, which includes everyone who is in the tech ecosystem. The regulations, as I said, would probably never be able to match up with technology. There would be regulatory vacuums. There would be several regulators leading to regulatory arbitrage. These problems will continue to happen. What I would expect the government to do, we in government to do, would be to ensure that the regulation is agile, there is no over-regulation, innovation is not stymied, and we are able to give trusted systems to our people. On the data front, I'll close with this. On data front, we will have to ensure, and I've spoken about this in Parliament as well, when the discussion on private digital assets, that is crypto, was being discussed. Finally, it's not been, of course, the bill has never been introduced. The CBDC got introduced by RBI on its own. It didn't come through a bill. In many of these technologies, because it's Wave 3, because it's peer-to-peer, because it is one-to-one, where one of the person could be outside the geography of your country, there has to be international, global cooperation on this front. And our finance minister has also said the same thing in the global fora with the World Bank or the IMF. And the IMF's Deputy Managing Director now, Geeta Gopinathan, has also said the same thing. We said the same thing in G20 as well. Unless there is a global cooperation, the trusted cross-border data flow will not take place. And if the trust is gone from the system, then everything falls apart. And to decide on enforcement issues, disputes, you need to have a global organization on the lines of the WTO, maybe using the same organization like the WTO, but you need to have a global organization and global principles or covenants which other countries will then make their separate laws. Otherwise, if enforcement cannot be done, if trust from the system while data flow takes place between geographies is not there, no amount of domestic geographic legislation or regulation can mitigate the situation completely. It could probably mitigate to some extent, but not completely. So these are issues which are emerging. These are issues which are there in the arena of tech laws and tech policy. This is being discussed by the government. But as I said, government functionaries, government itself, which would make the regulation, is always behind technology. So a lot of it has to come from your organizations. You could self-regulate, SROs could be formed. So you have to think on these lines and not just think about development of applications and its adoption, propagation, diffusion for making, for adding value to the system. That's important, but this is equally important. And as they say in life, very difficult to build trust, but if trust once broken, then it is gone forever. It's very difficult to revive it. So with these words, I'll end my speech. Thank you so much for inviting me to this function.
Thank you, Dr. Amar Patnaik, for taking out the time.
I would also, those who are willing to take any kind of advice on tech policy and tech law, since I'm a lawyer concentrating on this, I do help people to, sometimes it's very difficult to navigate so many of those regulators. Many of them do not know when to get into threats, where to get in. Some of these organizations, government organizations, are so opaque because they're used to working in the earlier system. They don't reply, they don't, I could probably extend my help, and all with the view that we should ensure that this trust remains. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Amar Patnaik. So, any questions for Dr. Amar Patnaik? So, if you can stay back, and any questions from someone? Okay, the hands are up. 1 second, can you just...
Thank you. Thank you so much for that very, very relevant and appealing discussion. My name is Aishwarya Gupta. I lead the AI practice for Wipro, and I completely echo your sentiments around the data and cybersecurity trust. The question I have is, while there is a sprut in building generative AI applications using technology and all of this, and everybody is taking their own bet on it, do you think that government should tie up with few of the leading industry and organizations like Wipro, Google, Microsoft, and build that governance to regulate some of the nuances which you talked about? Because I understand government has its own restrictions, but there has to be some kind of collaboration between the tech and government, backed by government, because then only it has its relevance, right? How do you see that coming in near future? Because I think we cannot talk about like 5 years or 10 years down the line.
You see, expert knowledge systems, primitive AI, used to exist even before this decade. But it never took off the way it has, only because of one thing, which I think is very important, and that is data, huge amount of data available for AI to be, algorithms to be trained on, and this data being available in a digitized format so that you don't have to digitize it. And thirdly, in a country like India, such data being available so freely and easily. You go to China, you will not get this data. We have the Open Government Data Initiative, where a lot of government data is put on over there for, it's open source, you can just, anybody can go and get it. So I think that is at the root of the AI-based or generative AI-based applications developing. I do not think that any technology would succeed unless there are people who are finding use of that technology. However, there is a caveat here. However, there are of course big players who have bundled their applications or bundled the systems in such a manner that if you don't use X, you will not be able to use Y. And that's where a strict competition law has to be there, and government is working on it. We changed this amendment to the competition law after, I think, some 20 years or something like that. But now the government is aware of the fact that we have to do very quickly, we have to be agile, we have to do it very fast. However, I feel personally that government itself will not be able to manage this entire ecosystem. The use of or the development or the establishment of SROs have to be promoted. There are two wings of government who are not on the same page on this particular theme, and therefore I am unable to say whether what would be the situation. While in, I think, digital intermediaries, they have promoted SROs. They have not been able to agree. MeitY and Ministry of Finance have not been able to agree on several other areas, including private digital assets. So I think the need to regulate AI, which would require registration, monitoring, and impact assessment of algorithms as well, it requires huge capacity. I have spoken in the floor of the parliament that whether we have the regulatory capacity, whether RBI has the regulatory capacity, whether SEBI has the regulatory capacity. SEBI itself says that we do not have any regulatory capacity. So it will take time for it to be built up. And for this to be built up in government will take time. And in the interim, therefore, the direction has to come from technology. Of course, I agree, government-backed. And that's why I think the way forward is the regulatory sandboxes, innovation sandboxes, and SROs.
Thank you so much,
so
Dr.
much.
Amar.
Thank you.
So any one question? Okay, we have.
Thank you very much, Pradeep Kumar Mishra sir. I'm very proud to be of same state where we belong to. And the question over here, very interesting to hear your perspective on regulatory and trust. These are the two things this is coming in. I think we came through different stages, right? Digitizations, where we brought our data to a software person's, then digitalizations, where we are actually automating our processes in pockets, but we are making good stride. And then to digital transformations, where we are driving this digital transformation along with the cultural changes. And now we are talking about AI, Gen I, particularly in a country which is very diversified. And currently my understanding is AI kind of technology is very dominant in one language, which is English language. And which you see in our countries where at least 15 regional languages, 1,500 dialects, there are so many things. How do you see AI having an impact in these things, and anything government is really investing on these sides to make AI understand other than other languages over here in India?
Thank you. So this is a point which I had forgotten to mention and discuss. But this is another area of bias. Now this is something which, again, the access to AI-enabled applications should not be available to only one group of people who speak one language. Intellectual capital is independent of language. Intellectual capital is independent too of rural-urban divide. So this intellectual capital, if it has to be captured and nurtured and would probably be used for developing new innovations or enriching our lives, then this bias has to be bridged. Fortunately, I would recommend that you do a little bit of research on it and probably come back to me on how to improve it. There is a system, there is this government-based or government-promoted application or an ecosystem of Bhasini, B-H-A-S-I-N-I. Bhasini is Bhasa, so Bhasini. So I think that they are trying to mitigate or minimize this risk and mitigate this bias to some extent. But I think a lot is required to be done. Once again, government's this intervention could achieve only this much or so much and not more, because that initiative has also to come from the AI enabled or AI developers. So both hands have to clap together to produce the maximum sound or the maximum benefit for the system or for our people. And that is what my answer would be, that government has got in there. We are thinking, government is thinking about AI. In fact, from here, I'd be going and sitting with Mr. Rajiv Chandrasekhar, the MOS. Good friend, we are together in the Joint Parliamentary Committee on Data Protection. He's a tech guy also, so we keep discussing technology all the time. But, you know, having served in bureaucracy, he is new in bureaucracy, but he is interacting with bureaucracy we reached the common conclusion that there is a huge amount of capacity issues. Unless you have capacity, how will you regulate? So there, both the things, both the players, or the private and the public sector, have a significant role to play. And I agree that unless this is addressed, we will fail to capture the intellectual capital that is already available in the rural areas of India, maybe in a language which is not English. A lot of our traditional knowledge, some of people laugh about it, but I'll tell you significantly, there is a lot of traditional knowledge which, if converted by evidence into scientific knowledge, can be a source of great innovations to satisfy a large number of people, particularly in the field of agriculture, particularly in the field of irrigation. What we are doing in space is exceptionally well, globally acknowledged. But there is a huge space for development and a huge space to unravel in the field of agriculture, on which 60% of our people lead their lives. So agri-tech, agriculture-related allied tech, that is irrigation, poultry, fisheries, aqua, no, I think supply chain, market development, managing businesses, front office, back office, I think huge use of precision agriculture for using water sources, improving soil types. A lot of people are working on it. For example, to my own state in Orissa, I have just recently got Professor Michael Kramer, who is a Nobel Prize winner in economics from the university. He was in Harvard, he has now come to University of Chicago. So when I was in Chicago, I roped him in to advise us, Orissa government, on agriculture. So we are working on two people, the Gates Foundation and Professor Kramer, Gates Foundation is funding it, to intervene in agriculture, water, irrigation. Now these are the areas where it can actually immensely improve the lives of people, and the inequities already existing will get bridged. Inequities both in terms of access to digital knowledge or financial knowledge, but more importantly, inequities in wealth. So many of these interventions are there, but unless the language issue is also addressed, you will not be able to get this traditional knowledge which is available and can be converted into scientific knowledge for adoption by other people. And you see, you have to remember India. I was recently born in Germany along with 25 members of parliament from all over the world in a UN function on climate change. In fact, I forgot to mention, climate change is an existential crisis. That is again where a lot of innovation can happen. In the SDGs, a lot of innovation can happen. So there the global south is looking up to India to take the leadership. Not just leadership in the political space, in the diplomatic space, but to give them technology, to improve their lives. We did it with the vaccines. We can do it with the agriculture, we can do it with the irrigation, we can do it with the mining, we can do it with the climate, we can do it with the water. So there's a huge space there.
So an Indian solved a grammatical puzzle. It was in Sanskrit and written by the Panini, an Indian grammarian, right? And he was supposed to, or
Panini,
yeah. Yes, the father as linguistic science. So that is going to help us a lot in this generative AI and all those language translations. And it was done by Indians. So it was a great moment for all of us in December last year.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So great input from your side. Thank you. So I would like to express our heartfelt gratitude to our esteemed chief guest, Dr. Patnaik, for sharing such visionary and inspiring words with us today. And to felicitate him, I request Ms. Mitali to come up on the stage. A huge round of applause, please. Come on, we can have more of this.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir, for your presence. Thank you.